America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
In the decades since President Nixon made that statement, America has spent more than $1 trillion on the war against drugs. And we've arrested more than 37 million people for nonviolent drug offenses. 37 million. That's a horrific toll. But what does this country have to show for it? High school students report the same rates of drug use as they did 40 years ago. And according to the most recent CDC report, drug overdose death rates have never been higher. So why have we poured money into a drug war that has obviously failed? And why, to this day, do police departments continue to pursue this failed war? One huge factor may be money. During the Reagan administration, the government started handing out grants to police departments to fight drug crimes, creating incentives for police to arrest more suspects. In Wisconsin, for example, just one drug arrest nets a given city or county about $153 in extra funding. But non-drug crimes like murder, rape, and burglary, they get no extra funding, no extra incentive for the police. But there's another financial motivation behind all this. The Reagan administration also gave police the authority to keep the vast majority of cash and assets they seize when waging the so-called drug war.
It turns out that whole departments have a monetary interest in increased drug arrests.
Most people don't realize that the financial incentives built into the system virtually guarantee that the overwhelming majority of drug arrests in the United States will be for nonviolent, low-level drug offenses.
A couple of months ago, we did a 2-day operation. We arrested over 200 people, a majority of them for selling drugs. A lot of the money comes out of seizures from the drug profits that the bigger players are making off of this. So I guess that money is being put to good use.
So where you get all that money?
All right.
That money's ours now. That's my money now.
Joining me now is a leading voice calling for reform, former Seattle Police Chief Norm Stamper. He's author of Breaking Rank, a top cop's expose of the dark side of American policing. Thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
You were a 34-year veteran police officer who went on to lead Seattle's police department. You saw some of the incentives firsthand. What is this system doing to our criminal justice system?
Well, in a word, it is corrupting the system. What we have seen with this drug war are insane numbers of Americans being arrested for nonviolent, very low-level drug offenses in the tens of millions of numbers. And what do we have to show for it? Drugs, as you pointed out earlier, are more readily available at lower prices and higher levels of potency than when Nixon first declared war against them. And make no mistake, he was really declaring war against his fellow Americans. He was declaring war particularly against young people, poor people, and people of color.
The federal prison growth over the last decade, let's look at that, Mr. Stamper. 0.4% has come from people who've committed homicides, yet 61% has been drug offenders. 61% drug offenders, most of them nonviolent, yet 0.4% for homicides. So not only are we putting families and others through a real human toll that follows some of them the rest of their life for only having a bag of marijuana in their pocket, but we're also building up these huge costs in terms of prisons, filling them up with people when a very small percentage of them are for people that are committing homicides and violent crimes.
Well, the prison industrial complex, the law enforcement, drug enforcement industry, the cartels themselves, heavy street traffickers are deeply invested in the status quo. They are very much invested in making sure by protecting and expanding their drug markets, oftentimes through violent means, that they will continue to reap the enormous, untaxed, obscene profits associated with illicit commerce.
Now, what the war on drugs does more than just give financial incentives to police. It actually funds whole communities. I want you to listen to this clip from the documentary, The House I Live In.
All sorts of people start to get a vested interest, a financial interest in keeping the system going.
There's a whole range of corporations, the taser gun manufacturers, private healthcare providers, phone companies, whole communities that now depend on prisons as their primary employer, now deeply invested in the drug war and this system of mass incarceration.
So you have all of these different parts of the communities that actually depend on high incarceration rates. That, of course, depends a lot on nonviolent drug offenders going to jail.
You hit the nail on the head. Money talks in this country. It always has. I'm sure it always will. What do we need to do to buck the incentives? What do we need to do as the American people to help bring an end to this insanity?
Former Seattle Police Chief Norm Stamper, thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you for yours.
Ahead, new voter suppression, but today a new push to stop them in their tracks. Stay with us.